Well, Michael, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it, and I'm so grateful that I've been given this opportunity to come here and visit somewhere that I never would have seen otherwise. So, yeah. To start with, could you tell me a little bit about the history of this region, what's happened here over the last sort of century or so?
Okay. The Shield region has a deep history, rich history. It dates way back into the classic period of Mayan civilization. But for time, let's focus more recently. In the early 1900s, colonialism came back into this area. Fincas were started, land was purchased from the indigenous people, and it started a process of marginalizing the indigenous population. The best land is controlled by 5 Fincas, and the rest of the mountains disponedly is available for the local population. A greater impact, or at least equally severe impact, came about in the 1980s, where soldiers from a failed military coup made it back into this region. They set up refugee camps in the mountains. At that time, there was no roads back here. There was no power. There was no mechanized items. It was people living in the forest, doing a slash and plant cultivation. They were still hunting with blow darts. The military that came back here did not escape notice, and soon afterwards followed an offensive of the army. The civil war in Guatemala put in opposition people's rights, socialism, and government control, even capitalism, the protection of the elite. And the indigenous people back here really didn't have a preference or a say in either of those conflicts, but they were caught dead center in the crossfires. When the army came back here, they set base in one of the local fincas, the largest and first finca. They set base. As they were setting up camp, they started snipering population in the following neighboring village. When the camp was secure, they started a 2-week march through the villages. As they entered each village, as they entered Chell, they captured who they could. Those that fled eastward and northward, further into the mountains. Those that were captured were later transported to the fincas, put in forced labor. And 30% of the population was slain and massacred. In Chell, I believe it was 80 people that they threw into the river. This scorched earth campaign went village to village throughout the region, but it didn't stop at 2 weeks. It just set a precedent. And for 15 years, the battle between the guerrilla forces in the mountains, further in the mountains, and the army that controlled this specific piece of ground raged. The Army never could control more than 4 hours, 3 hours hike
Yep.
from our location. And the guerrillas never could push back the Army. This all is rough mountainous terrain. Trails are small. To break new trails is extremely difficult. And this was the background of the Civil War. This has affected every person of the generation. There was no islands of peace, no neighborhoods that were spared, no families that didn't see this come into their lives. There is a trail that hikes out of Chell, and for 6 hours we can cross the mountain pass and drop into a village called Kaba. This was a center for refugees that had fled. Populations may have been in above 10,000 people. The Army had a policy of destroying any food crops they came across. The access to the outside world was totally blocked. There was no resupply of clothing, no food. This conflict continued and continued day after day. Starvation was a reality. At the end of the war, for a brief period of time, maybe 2 years, international organizations came back to offer help in rebuilding, restoring lives. One of the first groups were helicoptered back behind this frontline conflict of the guerrillas. They landed in the villages around Amachel, Santa Clara, and all the people hid in the woods. They tried to make announcements, don't be afraid, we're not here to hurt, we're here to help. There's been a peace accord. The reply of the people shows the intensity of the suffering. They said, we are not afraid, we're embarrassed. We have not had supply of clothes for years. We're not animals, but we're embarrassed at how we are living. Food supply was basically a root called malanga. It's taro root. The Army could chop the plants down, but they couldn't dig up all the roots to stop the harvest. Some wild greens. Like I said, this affected every family. Inside our team, each of my workers, team members, have a story. My wife has a story. This level of suffering and fight for survival has seeded a root within the people. Morality is based on survival. How you raise your kids was based on survival. Your relationship with your neighbors. the fear of death is deeply rooted and hidden behind the mosaic of culture that we see today. Mm. 1996 was the signing of a peace accord. I'm not sure what year, but later on, the president of Guatemala, Rasmat, was convicted of 1,500 cases of genocide in this region. As I've hiked these hills, I come across where people are exhuming people who have died from starvation, and the villagers have hid their bodies. Places where the military has massacred mass groups of people. I listen to stories inside the homes of fleeing through the mountains, of being sick without any medical attention or enough food source to sustain your life, of sons and daughters watching their parents barely be able to pull back from the brink of death in a time that there is no extra inside the lean-to that you live in for another meal, and your survival is dependent on a parent who can't get out of the bed that they're sleeping. Thank God that is not the current history of today. Also, it was a blessing for those organizations that came through on the initial pass. Long before the road came back here, 1996, there's still no road back here. And some good organizations, Agua de la Aldeas, came back, hiked supplies in, befriended the people, set up a few water projects. But this interest and this attention, international will, soon faded. And it left the people abandoned once more.
Could you tell me a little bit about what life is like for people in Shell today? What are the key challenges that are being faced in this community and the surrounding communities at the moment?
Could we start with what life was like when I came back?
Yeah, sure. That was going to be my next question, but perfect. Yeah, tell me about when you first arrived here, what it was like, what stood out to you.
Okay. In 2007, I made my first trip back to this area. There had been a road punch back here in 2005 and 6. The population was definitely not used to seeing anyone from the outside. And I came back with a church group from Chahul that was wanting to have an activity with another church in Chell. They gave me the passage and the ride back. And as I walked through the village, I asked if I could take pictures. The answer was no, you can't do that. But I looked at 3 different types of houses, and all of them were so small and so simple. There was no market. There was no vegetables for sale. People a trip out to Chahul was almost non-existent for the local population. There was no transportation other than a few pickups that would travel at 2, 3 in the morning to work their way back up into Chahul where the pavement ended. And the people were producing what they were consuming. But it was very, very simple. Families on the edge, on the more extreme level of poverty, depended on wild greens, maize, and the roots of malanga for food. The luxuries were salt. During this time, a personal story of my wife's, she wanted to buy a piece of property to build a house on. They were landless. Maybe 60% of the population was landless. And for 1 year, without exaggeration, her family ate tortillas, salt, peppers, wild greens. And during 1 year of labor, helping neighbors harvest coffee, helping cut the brush back in the different plantings, she was able to save up about $800, enough to buy a half of cuerda, enough for your house. Normal life back here. Wages today are at 100 Q. Work is not constant, not full time. So a family may make 300 quetzales a week. When I first came back, it was 25 Q, 75 quetzales a week. 75 quetzales is the equivalent of $10. A family of 4. And that's $2.50 a day for a family of 4. The father needs to donate 2 days for bringing firewood. He needs to designate another day in the planting of corn. There's no water, so the women have to carry the water, carry the laundry down to the river. There's no real market. In those first years, you could put all the vegetables for sale into gunny sacks for a population of 600-700 families. So it was just depended on what each family could scrape off of borrowed pieces of land or their own. Coffee export was here, but it had to be carried out originally by mule to a market. Still, the transportation costs are high. The family, on a good year, is going to receive $1 a pound for the bean. But the middleman and the international market receives most of the profit. When I look at families, even today, if the father is ambitious and can find enough work for 300 Q a week, most families are purchasing their corn today. The land is tired and doesn't produce well. Fertilizers are costing at least half of what the crop is worth. And so buying the corn, he's going to need to put 150 Q or more per week. That leaves 150 Q. A woman's wapil is worth 250 Q. Her skirt in today's market is worth 400. Their shoes are not expensive, 25, 30 Q a piece. But if you've got 4 kids and you've got a surplus, not counting buying food, but you just have a surplus after your tortillas of 150 Q and 4 kids, their shoes will eat up that surplus. We have a population percentage of 40% or more that qualifies on the UN standard of extreme poverty of under $1 a day, well under $1 a day. And we have areas that are confined by fincas that the local population does not have access to land. In situations when a family does not have any personal property and the wages are sporadic and low, it is impossible to pull yourself up by your bootstrings. It's impossible to climb your way out of this level of poverty. Without outside help, it will never change. It will get worse because the population is going to be greater in 20 years than it was before. As an organization, my original idea was from a personal desire. If I could connect directly with a family that lived in this situation, the little bit, not making a sacrifice, but the little bit of extra that I could put into this family would double or triple their income. And this idea was birthed years and years ago through organizations like Christian Children's Fund. And when I came back here and saw the level of poverty and the level of need, why go elsewhere? There's more than a life's worth of work here. I was living in an affluent neighborhood in prime real estate in the States. And if I could connect the dots of where I was living and was my home with this area that I had encountered that didn't have the same opportunities, and a direct link that didn't eat the money up along the way, we could make a difference. We could make a big change. I had an original vision of maybe helping one village. But when I showed up in an area with 22 villages and no one's back here, it's been hard to understand. Where do you say no? Where do you stop? There's a limit when the money's gone. Oh, let's go home and look for more. There's now we stay here, and the donations have been a blessing and wonderful, but there's still a limit. At 8 o'clock at night, we're worn out, and at 6 in the morning, there's someone else in line. I wish people could open up and wake up their hearts. Not just to poverty and need, but to life itself. I feel like we walk through life asleep. And we need to wake up. We see possibilities. Oh, I can create my business. I can build a bigger house. These dreams, but we still aren't awake. And we're on this planet and we're in this world of opportunity that many people will never see. And we should open our hearts. And we should find that limit that says, I have enough. And enter the joy of sharing. There's lots of things I do now that I'm 64 years old, and I'm well aware I'm on the last stage of life. But I'm doing things that still have a fruitation 10, 20, 30 years down the road. I plant trees that I hope will have a life of 200-300 years old. And the very act of giving in this way fills me up in a way that a second bowl of ice cream never could. A new car wouldn't come close. Next.
Yeah, that was really powerful. Thank you for sharing that. Just gonna let that sit for a minute. You mentioned to me that that there's been changes to the climate here in recent years, some hurricanes and that sort of thing. Could you tell me a little bit about the impact that that's having on this region?
One of the hot topics in the news is the environment, climate change, the consuming of resources. I read a statistic that modern society is consuming 175% of the resources, the capacity of the planet to regrow resources. I also read and hear that climate change will affect the people in extreme poverty, marginal places in the world, marginalized places in the world, much harder. I listen to people that say climate change. Climate always changes, and that's true. But it's also true that modern man is affecting this planet in a way that is unprecedented. And we are at a spearhead of time. When I was a kid, I lived in a logging town, and we counted how many log trucks had just one log. 6, 7, 8 feet at the butt. And every day they rolled into the mills. You don't see any of that today. 75% of the earth has been occupied and changed by mankind. Here, we've seen at least the accusation of climate change in a few different ways. After working 5 years, I was seeing progress. I would come back each year and say, things are a little better. Things are a little better. Things are a little better. And then I started coming back, and then over 2 years, why does it seem worse? And it was a fungus in the coffee, La Roya. Due to an increase of temperature, and all the coffee that had been planted back here was susceptible to La Roya. And for 2 years, they lost their cash crop. More recently, and I believe it was in 2021, November, we had a hurricane come through. It was the second hurricane during my time of working here. It's normal that hurricanes hit this area every 15 years. This hurricane hit Chell and the surrounding villages hard. We had 10, 12 days of strong rain. The rivers rose and we listened to the boulders rolling. And I'm not talking about rocks. I know of boulders that were 6 feet in diameter that we can't find today. They've gone. It wiped out all the roads. It cut off the bridges. It flooded the town. The river jumped out of the banks and flew through Main Street, Hala Las Flores. As things were calming down and the river was descending, I got noticed by another friend in the outside world that, get ready, another one's coming your way. And back to back, 2 hurricanes hit us. The second one dumped over 100 inches of rain in 10 days. The mountain is full of scars of landslides. But when you go in and you cut the brush and look for an area to plant, you find the land broken and broken and broken in areas that you don't expect to have gotten ready to slough off. I listened to local people say, thank God a third hurricane didn't hit us or we all would have died. And truthfully, there are villages that were ready to go down the mountain with just a little more rain. There's a whole story in the aftermath of the hurricanes. The response of where to look for food, a society that got used to contact with the outside world and now was dependent on the transportation of corn, and it's gone in a moment. In 2-week period of time, it didn't matter how much money you had in your hands. There's nothing to buy. The closest supply area was maybe 2 hours of car work and 9 hours of hiking. Pretty hard to bring food for 20,000 people on your back for 9 hours. And now, fast forwarding just 2 years, a third hurricane has passed us by. It was a near miss, but it dumped 14 inches of rain in 8 hours. And once again, all this land that is susceptible to movement and raw flows down the hill. The power of these storms is incredible. They are catastrophic events that will change the landscape. We can see the effect of climate change in a microcosm back here. On my right-hand side is a biosphere. No one's hiked through it. If you want to blaze the first trail, give yourself a week. and it's untouched. The edges of it, people have chopped a little bit with a chainsaw and packed the wood out on their back, but they can't make a real dent in this forest. But the other side, we have roads. They just have come in. And where the roads have come in, chainsaws. And there are vast areas that are so dry now. The cloud forest produces its cover, produces its rainfall, stays humid and moist. The same elevation on the other side. The soil is depleted, doesn't produce. It's dry. The difference is incredible. This year is our first year to put strong focus on reforestation. We had a goal of producing 20,000 trees. We're 6 months into that. We have already passed our goal and have planted that many trees. We've been planting trees for a number of years, but this is the first focused effort with funding. And instead of patting ourselves on the back, the reforestation team is saying, we're going to double the nursery. And we're not just planting a plantation of pine trees, as good as that might be. The national forest in the States, let's plant the most commercially viable tree and harvest and harvest and harvest. But we've collected species so far of 16 different native trees from the forest and are expanding that biosphere back into its natural habitat. A drop in the bucket, but drops in the buckets fill up buckets. They're good actions. I'll keep dropping droplets in the bucket till I die. It's worthwhile.
Okay. Good to get back into it.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about the project and run through all of that in a minute, but before we get to that, could you tell me about the story of your son, Forrest, and how that influenced your starting this organization?
Yeah.
And only if you're happy to talk about it, of course.
We open a real can of worms to broach the subject of what happened when we started work down here with my family. It touches on the idea of God, country, and freedom, more of family. Things that we talk are sacred. And in 2005 and 6, I had boys that started joining the military. My first boys were twins, and they went to college on a Rotary scholarship. Second boy, he joined the Army Reserve for the same reason. He was deployed into Iraq, and then later Forrest was deployed into Afghanistan. And Forrest went over as a first lieutenant. He made several phone calls back to the States and talked to me. In one phone call he said, "Dad, we're doing everything we trained for." They were stuck in the Peck Valley to the north of Afghanistan. And he went with an idea of service, with an idea that the country is going to send me to help other countries, and had his full attention and efforts to fulfill that goal of helping, paving a way for people to be free. Me and my wife Carol were building our home, a new home, during this conflict. Forrest called me just weeks or maybe a month before he passed away. But he was returning back from a maneuver. They reported radio chatter that they were being watched. The enemy he was seeking had come back across the border with a new equipped group of militia. They set up an ambush, and when Forrest was crossing a puddle in the road, he hit an IUD, and him and his sergeant were killed. It took one leg off, one arm off. It sent our family, which was a tight unit, far from perfect, but a family that was tightly together, into a turmoil. How do you accept this? How do you embrace this? How do you connect with the reality that your son is gone, that your twin brother is gone, that this boy who was outstanding, not just because I'm his dad, but was outstanding, captain of the college track team, honest, making decisions to the highest moral level that he could, is gone. This was a backdrop to a plan that now that my kids are growing and on their own and we have an abundance, let's go into the third world. Let's look for a place that we can help and we can share what we have. This happened in the midst of that process before action could be produced by the desires. And it fortified him. When troubles come, we have the decision really to go 360 degrees. But we should use them to push through to the best that we can find. Forrest divided up his life insurance with his wife and with each of us in the family. And he left me $10,000. What can you do with $10,000? That is the blood of your son. And when I arrived back here and I saw the level of poverty and the level of need, I didn't have any problem putting that into the soil, into the land of the shield. Our first project that we did with this money really wasn't well done. I didn't have any background in humanitarian work. The language were 2 languages away. These people speak Ashil, they don't speak Spanish. They think Ashil. They don't think American. And our project, I mimicked the Heifer Foundation and put cows into a village with the idea that this would expand and expand and expand and expand. And this sacrifice would not be in vain. That's not the reality of the project. But I made the commitment. Next year I'm coming back. I'm finding $10,000 more. I'm going to find the same amount of money. That is from my sweat. And I'm going to put it beside my son's. And we put in a water system for the village I live in now. 70 families, now for 14 years, have been turning on a water faucet and have water in front of their house. And I came back again and again and again. And people started joining with us. The local community that we lived in, our banker said, we have a Rotary group. Here's $1,000. A client I'm working with did the same. And our first years, our budgets, whatever money we had, and normally we were talking between 10 or 20,000 at the most for 4 or 5 years. I would come down to Guatemala, come back here. 2-3 months, we were broke, but we had done something. We worked with water, we worked with gardens, we worked with small animals. We brought just general aid back. It was real easy to find a list of widows. Who wouldn't want to help widows that are living in a society that at that time probably 60% of the people were well under extreme poverty levels. I'm honest in the evaluation of my work, what I've done, of the work of my team. And we don't hit it 100%. But I tell you, after 14 years, it's incredible what's happened. And there are, we call them patrons, there are donors that probably will be with us far into the future. And a seed that was an idea birthed probably from my parents into me of service, a seed that was transferred into my son who gave his life in service. It's still growing. It's still happening. We named the organization The Ripple Effect off of a little nursery song the kids sang. Drop a pebble into the water. Watch the ripples grow. This is the way that if you love others, everybody will know. And it is true, I believe, that good actions spawn something. And they don't have to be perfectly orchestrated like my first project. But we should keep putting that energy, putting that effort, and putting our minds learning, listening. one key to our organization is listen to the local people. What do they really want? What do they need? And how can you make our ideas of help fit their cultural situation? And this organization has grown past my dreams. It has actually grown past my ability to manage. We have a team of more than 10 people working every day. Some of them can't write, some of them can't read, but they can do good work. And from $10,000 gift, we go through more than that each month. And the impact has affected more than 14 villages. There has been that many villages have given water.
If you could,
One last thought
Yeah.
on forest.
yeah,
I believe in connections. I believe in some way forest is still connected with me and with what has been started here. And as a father is proud of his son, I sense that Forrest is proud of what he has played in this region. A place that was war-torn, that has healing, that enters into families that have been broken apart like our own, but get a little bit of help, a little bit of step up. Far from thankful for his passing, but thankful for his part in my today.
If you could, I guess, encapsulate in a nutshell what the ripple effect is trying to achieve here, what would you say the goal is, the organisation?
As an organization, we have a mandate to look for those in extreme poverty and seek some way to help. When we have written on a chalkboard, what are we doing? And we itemize it. There's filters, there's blankets, there's gardening, there's water. We're into 15 different things. But when we condense them into categories, we have a team that is building stoves. They have learned how to build stoves that eliminate the smoke from inside the kitchen, inside the homes. I have watched toddlers learn to walk around open fire pits. And the dangers daily. They've been in homes where I watched the women blinking and breathing in the smoke. Because these houses will not vent themselves. These stoves reduce the wood use. All that sets into one team, and we have a leader that organizes 3 other men, and they go village to village, and every month they're able to build 20-25 stoves. They're expensive, almost $200 a stove. But I think we passed over 1,000 so far. To luck in the villages And it's pretty easy. When I have free time, I like to just walk through a village, and you can look at the different houses and go, why is this one such a shack? Why is this one so needy? And go in and ask a few questions. First question, do you have land? If it's just a woman, the first question, do you have a husband? Or are you a single mother back here in this society? Pretty hard go for single mothers. If you have a husband, do you guys have any land to plant on? And so many times these people that are in absolute need, they don't have any land. They might have even borrowed where they put up their little wood structure to live in. Redirect me. Give me your question again.
No, that was a great answer. The project in a nutshell, what you're trying to achieve, what the goal is.
Okay. To look at these instances of need and evaluate and listen, what do you need most? And evaluate, okay, if you're going to ask for something I have no capacity to help you with, give me number 2. That fits into one of our items, our programs. And let's bring that in right now and find a solution. And then there's other ones that, that's going to take some work to figure out how to improve this one. But let's either, as an organization, think how to evolve to meet that type of need, or we tell the people, Cheba, wait. We can get back to you, but this is going to take some time.
Yep.
Recently, I got an email that Rotary Global Grant we've worked on for over 2 years is almost ready for funding. The village has waited now 3 years for a reply. We need water. Can you help us? It takes time, but it's at the door. When there's no other roads of help, people are patient back here. And thankful that there's someone trying to get help in. Like I said, we have over 10 people working with us right now. 10 in a solid team relationship. And it is paid work, and they have individual skills. But what I ask out of them, most important, have a heart to change the lives of extreme poverty. From that we can learn and we can grow and we can achieve some level.
A little bit about the Clean Water Project and how does that work? How does that start when a community needs clean water? Run me through that process.
One of my strongest interests when I started was clean water. It just seemed like a neat project that had a huge impact. And this area has almost 100 inches of rain a year. There's water here for 90% of the villages, but it's not in the villages. Open water, like almost anywhere on the planet where man lives, is polluted. I can remember my first years watching the schools that were starting their classroom duty. Take your trash and throw it in the river. And the locals said, yeah, we have a problem with trash. Our river's not big enough. You're the first village on the river. That's not the problem. You're sending your waste down to the next people. Chemical fertilizers and pesticides, they make all the close water sources that people use toxic. So we've been looking for springs in the mountains. At times, we have been over 2 hours hiking to the spring. We will pack in cement and rebar and into the spring and make a spring box, collect the water into the size of tube that it can fill, and then start trenching through the mountains. We use very simple tools, an apnea level that measures grade to see that we can keep finding a route going down, down, down. There are calculations of pressure tanks and brake tanks and technical items, but it basically is water goes downhill.
Yeah.
And in the mountains, let's find a spring above the village and then let's get it to the village.
Yeah.
Engineers Without Borders will double check our plans and our ideas. And the village donates all manner of obra no classificado, all manual labor. If I was to pay for the labor to install it, we would need double the funding. The village easily gives half the power of the project. The local municipality has participated in probably 6 villages. And we make a simple design, start branching out secondary lines into the community after passing through a holding tank. And I am not sure the actual count, but I think that we have probably done about 22 water projects. 14 of them being new, others being amplifications, expanding a water system. That is a lot of people. And we have passed through the majority of the villages in this area now have water.
Tell me about your plans for the future of the ripple effect. What do you see the organization doing in the future? And maybe just wait for that. There we go.
Our organization has been a blend of me, my culture, my skills, trying to meet the needs of local people and using local people. We are forming an association that is legal entity like a nonprofit in Guatemala. Our president of this worked with me on a water project for his village in 2008 as a volunteer representative of his village. He was the lead go-to person. After 3-4 months of work, he said, "Michael, can you loan me a little money because I've been volunteering and I'm broke." That was his heart, to help and serve his community. Everyone that started with me started as volunteers. Eventually we had enough funding that now we're paying pittance, and now we're paying something that is barely, truthfully, barely a living wage. This association, this organization, the team members, each have developed their personal skill and vision. And as I age and as the organization has grown where it cannot be managed and accomplished by one person, it's time to let them have their wings and develop their service into their community. We have some rock solid programs that when a donation comes in, a product comes out. There's no question about it. And I want to write these reports and the solicitudes for donations for these rock solid projects with 100% stamp of approval. There's other things that we're learning, things that are more complicated and equally viable to continue. And I want to be honest with the donors that this is where we're at and this is where we want to get to. And as I have stepped down and the responsibility level of the team has increased, everyone has grown. If 2 years ago I would have died in an accident, we would have left a turmoil of a mess. If in 2 years from now I die in an accident, I think we will leave a solid organization that can continue. And I hope it has two unique factors. One is it has a confidence between white and brown skins. That the money that exists in the US, in Europe, with donors that do not understand life of the Ashiel people, but that they have confidence in the production and the honesty of this team. And the second one is that this team of local people can learn to expand their own thinking and create an Ashiel entity that culturally helps their neighbors from the same headset, the same background. I think those two things, if we succeed, are unique. They don't often exist.
What are you most proud of after 14 years at the Ripper?
I probably have a little interesting answer to that. I'm actually maybe most proud to have entered into the life of some people that it's hard to understand. It's hard to understand your economics, how you make it. The thought process of the vision of life is different. And to join up with that is a lengthy process. In project-wise, I don't sense a difference in when we complete a water project, and we've completed water projects of 600 families, 700 families. You're talking 5,000 people in one project. And I really don't sense any more pride or joy or happiness than when I can bring a little bit of firewood for 2 days to a widow. The action is the same. And the reward of emotion is the same.
At the end of the very first email you sent to me, that you said that you were tired. Could you explain what you meant by that?
I came down with some lofty goals, some ideals, and I wanted to put them to practice. And it's a very rewarding road, but it's not easy. I've given myself and often put first place the service to these communities for over 14 years. The last 7 have been almost non-stop, 7 days on every week. And as noble as those ideals and the work is, it is good just to enjoy life, to appreciate the journey that we've been given in this world. And I want to continue helping people and caring for people. That's part of my journey, that's part of my life, part of my heart. But I cannot carry the ball of changing the world. A friend of mine who came down and worked with us for a couple of years, he said, "You can't change the world, you change yourself." And I think that is one of the key phrases. If we change ourselves and make ourselves into the best that we could be, the world changes. And if there is 1,000 of us that do that, it changes by 1,000 times. If there were 7 billion of us that would do that, we wouldn't recognize the world that would come. It's time to take the main mantle of work and let the Ashiel people carry it to the next level. This has been training period. Training for me, training for them. And I really sense that we're at the day where it's go. Everybody's working full tilt. Everyone has developed skills, and we need to develop more. But it's an honest team with a good heart. Good enough?
Yeah.
That's the hard question.
Yeah, that was...
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess an opportunity now to explore both those extremes of working here. I want to ask you about your toughest, most challenging day working here, but I also want to ask you about your best, most rewarding day or experience that you've had down here. And you can decide which one you want to talk about first.
I don't know if I can answer that question.
It's okay.
One, because each day can feel so full. And there are also other moments that can be so hard. And they come at such regular intervals that there's no crucial moments. Yeah.
I feel that being down here as well. I was writing my journal the other night after one of the days here, and it just felt so extreme. Like, one minute you're playing and laughing with kids, and then the next you're like helping a family who's in the most abject of poverty. And
Yeah.
it's both at once, and it's really quite overwhelming.
And that makes it so challenging at times.
Yeah.
That you can be moving along and you see progress and you're happy to do it, and you open the door and you go, holy shit. This is a mess, this situation. Sometimes I'll go visit homes and I'll knock on the door and I'll open and there's a body laying on the table. And it's only this big. Yeah, they lost their baby. They lost their baby at 7 days. This week, my wife is trying to get healthy enough to go up to Chahul because her sister's baby's dying. It's down to skin and bones. It's 1.5 years old. And those, I never ran into that in the States. But it's a constant part of life down here. And then the other day you gave a banana to a kid and they went ecstatic. It's so simple, but it actually is such an emotional high of, that was perfect. There's nothing more I could do. That was just a perfect little gift and it had a perfect result. Yeah.
Well, that wraps up my formal questions. One thing that, a part of this project that I'm running every month, I visit a different not-for-profit organisation, and I have people who support what I do through Patreon, and every month I take half the money, and half of it sort of helps me keep travelling, helps me keep telling stories, and the other half goes directly to the organisations. So
Wow.
on behalf of our supporters, I would like to give you, it's 1,000 quetzales, and it's nothing crazy, but hopefully it can go towards something in
I think you
particular.
can
But
understand how much, 1,000 quetzales isn't a lot when you look at bank accounts, but when you look at people down here, you know the impact that it has. It's 20 blankets. So, thank you.
no problem.